the community builder Paul Hogan's mission to transform lives through authentic connection. In the working-class suburbs of Sydney in 1983, 33-year-old Paul Hogan discovered that his greatest talent wasn't just making people laugh or building bridges, it was building communities where ordinary people could discover extraordinary potential within themselves, creating ripple effects of positive change that would transform entire neighborhoods while proving that authentic leadership and genuine care could accomplish more than any government program or corporate initiative ever dreamed possible. Paul's revelation came during a moment of personal crisis when his own bridge construction crew faced mass layoffs, and he realized that his natural ability to connect with people, combined with his growing platform in television, could be channeled into something far more meaningful than entertainment success. He could become a catalyst for community transformation that would help working-class families build better lives while maintaining their dignity, values, and authentic character. The inspiration struck him during a particularly difficult conversation with his colleague Danny Morrison, whose family was struggling with unemployment, housing insecurity, and the despair that came with feeling invisible to a society that seemed designed to benefit everyone except ordinary working people who played by the rules but still couldn't get ahead despite their best efforts and genuine character. "You know what's wrong with this picture, Danny?" Paul asked as they sat in a pub after another day of uncertain work. "We spend all day building infrastructure that connects different parts of the city, but nobody's building the connections that would help people like us build better lives for our families. We've got skills, experience, and character, but no system that recognizes that or helps us use it." That conversation planted a seed that would grow into the most ambitious community development project in Australian history, a network of working-class mutual support systems that would demonstrate how authentic leadership, combined with practical wisdom and genuine care, could create opportunities and solve problems that traditional institutions had failed to address effectively. Paul understood that his growing television success gave him a unique opportunity to serve as a bridge between the world of media influence and the reality of working-class struggles, using his platform not just for entertainment but for community building that could create lasting positive change in the lives of people who needed hope, opportunity, and recognition of their inherent worth and potential. But this mission would require Paul to risk everything he had built in his entertainment career, challenging him to move beyond the safety of comedy and television success into the uncertain territory of community activism, where failure would mean disappointing the very people he was trying to help while potentially destroying his own career and financial security. The choice between personal advancement and community service would define not just Paul's character, but his legacy, as he embarked on a journey that would test every lesson he had learned about authentic leadership, genuine relationships, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they work together with shared purpose and mutual support. Chapter 1: The Awakening. Paul Hogan's transformation from entertainer to community builder began with a phone call that shattered his comfortable routine and forced him to confront the gap between his television success and the reality of working-class struggles in his own neighborhood, where families he had known for years were facing crises that all his humor and charm couldn't solve, but his influence and resources potentially could. The call came from Margaret Sullivan, an elderly neighbor whose husband had worked construction for 40 years before being forced into early retirement by a back injury that left the family struggling with medical bills, housing costs, and the grinding anxiety of financial insecurity, despite decades of honest work and careful savings that proved insufficient against circumstances beyond their control. "Paul, I know you're busy with your television career, and I wouldn't normally ask." Margaret's voice trembled with the shame that came from having to seek help after a lifetime of self-reliance, "but Tom's getting worse and I don't know where else to turn. The welfare system treats us like we're trying to cheat them, and the medical system acts like Tom's pain isn't real because he's just a construction worker." Paul listened to Margaret's story with growing anger, not at her, but at a system that failed to recognize the value and dignity of people who had spent their lives building the infrastructure that made everyone else's success possible, only to be discarded when age or injury made them less economically useful to employers who had benefited from their labor and loyalty. The conversation continued for over an hour as Margaret described the isolation, frustration, and despair that came with navigating bureaucratic systems designed by middle-class professionals who had never experienced the reality of working-class life, where a single medical emergency could destroy decades of careful financial planning and personal sacrifice. "We raised 3 children, paid our taxes, never asked for handouts," Margaret continued. "Tom taught Sunday school, coached Little League, helped neighbors with home repairs. But now when we need help, the only people who understand what we're going through are other families in the same situation, and none of us have the resources or connections to make a real difference." Paul hung up the phone with his mind racing. recognizing that Margaret's situation wasn't unique. It was representative of a broader crisis affecting working-class families throughout Australia, who had been abandoned by institutions that claimed to serve their interests while actually serving the needs of more politically powerful and economically influential constituencies. The television studio where Paul worked the next day felt different somehow, as if the lights were too bright and the conversations too superficial compared to the real-world struggles of people like Margaret and Tom Sullivan, who were fighting battles that never made it into comedy sketches or entertainment news, but represented the most important challenges facing ordinary families. During breaks between tapings, Paul found himself calling other neighbors, former work colleagues, and community contacts to ask about their situations and challenges, discovering a pattern of isolation, frustration, and unmet needs that suggested systematic problems requiring coordinated solutions rather than individual charity or government programs designed by people who didn't understand the community they were supposed to serve. The conversations revealed that working-class families possessed enormous reservoirs of practical knowledge, mutual support instincts, and problem-solving capabilities that were being wasted because no system existed to organize and channel these resources effectively, while middle-class institutions designed to help them often created more barriers than opportunities due to cultural disconnects and bureaucratic inflexibility. John Cornell noticed Paul's distraction during their regular planning meetings and eventually asked about the change in his demeanor and priorities, leading to a conversation that would reshape both their personal relationship and professional collaboration as they discussed the possibility of using Paul's growing platform for community development rather than just entertainment success. "You know what I think the problem is, John," Paul explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "Everyone's trying to help working-class families by bringing them into middle-class systems instead of building systems that recognize and utilize working-class strengths. We're treating symptoms instead of addressing root causes, and we're making people feel like failures when the real failure is in institutions that don't understand the communities they're supposed to serve." Cornell's background in journalism and media production provided valuable perspective on how to document and publicize community development efforts while maintaining authenticity and avoiding the patronizing tone that often characterized middle-class approaches to working-class issues, but he also recognized the risks involved in moving beyond entertainment into territory where failure could damage both their careers and the communities they hoped to help. The planning process that emerged from these conversations combined Paul's natural leadership abilities with Cornell's strategic thinking and media expertise, creating a framework for community development that would leverage Paul's television platform while maintaining authentic connection to working-class values and priorities that respected the dignity and capabilities of people they hoped to serve. The decision to move forward required Paul to risk his entertainment career by dedicating time and resources to community work that might not generate immediate financial returns or career advancement, but could potentially create lasting positive change in the lives of families who had been ignored by traditional institutions despite their fundamental decency and genuine need for opportunity rather than charity. Paul's commitment to this mission was solidified during a community meeting at the local Catholic church, where he listened to dozens of stories similar to Margaret Sullivan's and realized that his television success had given him not just opportunities for personal advancement, but responsibility for community service that he could not ignore without betraying the values and relationships that had shaped his character. The meeting ended with Paul making a public commitment to use his platform and resources to help build a community support network that would address practical needs while preserving dignity and encouraging self-reliance, marking the beginning of a journey that would test every aspect of his leadership abilities while potentially creating a model for community development that could be replicated in working-class neighborhoods throughout Australia. Chapter 2, The Foundations. The establishment of Paul Hogan's Community Development Initiative required him to translate his natural leadership instincts and television industry connections into practical systems for addressing the complex challenges facing working-class families, while maintaining the authentic relationships and cultural understanding that would ensure the program served real needs rather than middle-class assumptions about what working-class families required. The first phase involved extensive listening sessions where Paul, accompanied by Cornell and a small team of volunteers, visited homes throughout his neighborhood to document specific challenges and identify existing resources and capabilities that could be organized more effectively to create mutual support networks based on reciprocal assistance rather than traditional charity models that often damaged recipients' self-respect and community relationships. These home visits revealed that working-class families possessed remarkable resilience, practical problem-solving abilities, and willingness to help neighbors, but lacked coordination mechanisms and access to resources that could amplify their individual efforts into collective solutions capable of addressing systemic problems that exceeded any single family's capacity to resolve through individual action alone. Mrs. Betty Chen, a widow raising 3 children while caring for her elderly mother, had developed innovative approaches to stretching household budgets and managing complex family responsibilities, but her knowledge remained trapped within her individual situation, where it could only benefit her immediate family rather than helping other families facing similar challenges. Frank Rodriguez, a skilled carpenter whose construction company had failed during an economic downturn, possessed valuable expertise in home maintenance and repair that could benefit the entire community. But he lacked a system for connecting his capabilities with neighbors' needs in ways that provided fair compensation while building community relationships rather than traditional business transactions. The listening sessions also revealed that government assistance programs often created perverse incentives that discouraged self-improvement efforts, while bureaucratic requirements consumed enormous amounts of time and energy that could be better utilized for productive activities, suggesting that community-based solutions might be more effective than attempting to reform institutional systems designed by people who didn't understand the communities they were supposed to serve. Paul's television industry experience proved invaluable for documenting these discoveries and creating communication materials that could explain the community development approach to potential supporters, volunteers, and families who might benefit from participation, while his authentic working-class background ensured that messaging remained respectful and accurate rather than patronizing or exploitative. The development of practical programs began with simple initiatives that addressed immediate needs while building relationships and demonstrating the effectiveness of community-based approaches, starting with a neighborhood tool library where families could borrow equipment for home improvement projects while sharing knowledge and building connections that could support more ambitious collaborative efforts. The tool library succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, not just because it saved families money on equipment purchases, but because it created natural opportunities for skill sharing, relationship building, and collective problem solving that addressed social isolation while developing practical capabilities that increased families' self-reliance and confidence in their ability to improve their circumstances. Success with the tool library led to expansion into other areas, including childcare cooperatives where parents shared supervision responsibilities to reduce costs while building support networks, community gardens that provided fresh food while teaching valuable skills and creating gathering spaces for relationship building, and skill-sharing workshops where community members taught each other practical abilities ranging from basic car maintenance to financial planning. The childcare cooperatives proved particularly valuable for single parents and families where both parents worked multiple jobs, providing safe, affordable childcare while creating networks of mutual support that helped families navigate challenges ranging from medical emergencies to employment transitions, demonstrating how community-based solutions could be more flexible and responsive than institutional programs. The community gardens transformed vacant lots into productive spaces that provided fresh food for families struggling with food costs while creating opportunities for intergenerational knowledge sharing, relationship building, and community pride that had positive effects extending far beyond food production to encompass mental health, social cohesion, and neighborhood safety improvements. The skill-sharing workshops revealed the enormous reservoirs of practical knowledge existing within the community, as families shared expertise ranging from traditional crafts and cooking techniques to modern technologies and professional skills, creating informal education systems that were more accessible and culturally appropriate than formal programs offered by institutions that often failed to connect with working-class learning styles and priorities. Paul's role in these initiatives evolved from initial organizer to facilitator and advocate, using his media connections to secure resources and publicity while maintaining focus on community ownership and leadership development that would ensure program sustainability, even if his involvement decreased due to other professional obligations or changing circumstances. The documentation of program outcomes provided evidence that community-based approaches could achieve results that exceeded those of traditional social service programs, while costs that were substantially lower and satisfaction rates that were dramatically higher among participants who valued the respect, dignity, and empowerment that characterized community-based solutions versus institutional charity approaches. The success of these initial programs attracted attention from government agencies, academic researchers, and other communities facing similar challenges, creating opportunities for Paul to expand his influence while also creating risks that success might lead to bureaucratization or co-optation by institutional systems that could compromise the authentic, community-controlled character that made the programs effective. The foundation was solid, but the real test would come as the initiative expanded beyond the comfortable boundaries of Paul's immediate neighborhood into diverse communities with different challenges while maintaining the authentic relationships and cultural sensitivity that had made the original program successful in building trust and achieving practical results. Chapter 3: The Expansion. The success of Paul Hogan's neighborhood-based community development programs created both opportunities and challenges as requests for assistance poured in from working-class communities throughout Sydney and beyond. requiring Paul to develop systems for scaling authentic relationship-based approaches without losing the personal connection and cultural sensitivity that had made the original initiatives effective in building trust and achieving practical results. The expansion process began with careful selection of community partners who shared Paul's values and demonstrated genuine commitment to serving working-class families with respect and dignity, rejecting offers from government agencies and nonprofit organizations whose approaches emphasize professional credentials over community relationships and bureaucratic procedures over practical problem-solving capabilities. Maria Santos, a community organizer from the predominantly Latino neighborhood of Fairfield, became Paul's first expansion partner after demonstrating her ability to build authentic relationships with families while organizing successful initiatives around immigrant rights, language education, and small business development that respected cultural traditions while helping families navigate Australian institutions and economic opportunities. The Fairfield partnership required Paul to adapt his approaches to address challenges specific to immigrant families, including language barriers, cultural differences, and discrimination issues that added complexity to the basic economic and social challenges facing all working-class communities, while maintaining focus on community strengths and capabilities rather than deficit-based approaches that treated immigration as a problem rather than a source of cultural richness and economic opportunity. Working with Maria's established network of trusted community leaders, Paul helped develop programs that combined practical assistance with cultural celebration and preservation, creating ESL classes that incorporated job skills training, cultural festivals that built bridges between different ethnic communities, and small business incubators that helped immigrant entrepreneurs develop economically viable enterprises while maintaining cultural authenticity. The success of the Fairfield partnership demonstrated that Paul's community development model could be adapted to different cultural contexts without losing effectiveness, but also revealed the importance of genuine partnership with local leaders who possessed deep community relationships and cultural knowledge that outside organizers could never replicate regardless of their good intentions or professional qualifications. Aboriginal community leaders from Redfern approached Paul after hearing about his work, requesting assistance with developing programs that could address the unique challenges facing Indigenous families in urban environments while respecting traditional cultural values and addressing the complex legacies of historical oppression and ongoing discrimination that created barriers to economic opportunity and social integration. The Redfern partnership required Paul to confront his own cultural limitations and unconscious assumptions while learning to work as a junior partner with Indigenous leaders whose understanding of community development was informed by thousands of years of cultural wisdom and recent decades of experience navigating systems designed to eliminate rather than support Indigenous communities and values. Working with Uncle Jimmy Peterson, a respected Aboriginal elder and community activist, Paul learned approaches to community development that emphasized healing, cultural revival, and connection to land and tradition as essential foundations for addressing practical challenges like unemployment, housing, and healthcare access that could not be solved through purely economic or technical interventions. The Aboriginal partnership expanded Paul's understanding of authentic leadership to include dimensions of cultural responsibility, historical awareness, and intergenerational thinking that were largely absent from mainstream Australian approaches to community development, while also demonstrating how traditional Indigenous values of collective responsibility and resource sharing align closely with working-class values of mutual support and community solidarity. Each new partnership required Paul to develop different skills and approaches while maintaining core commitments to community ownership, cultural respect, and practical problem-solving that preserved the authenticity and effectiveness that had made his work successful. But the diversity of community needs and context created enormous demands on his time and energy that threatened to overwhelm his capacity for maintaining quality relationships. The media attention generated by the expanding community development work created both opportunities and risks for Paul's entertainment career, as some industry professionals viewed his community activism as a distraction from career development, while others recognized the authenticity and depth it brought to his public persona and creative work. John Cornell's support proved crucial during this challenging period as he helped Paul balance competing demands while using media coverage to generate resources and support for community programs. But the expansion also strained their personal relationship as time constraints limited their collaboration on television projects that had been central to their professional partnership. The development of training programs for community organizers from other neighborhoods created opportunities to share Paul's approaches more broadly while building a network of practitioners who could adapt his methods to local conditions, but also raised questions about quality control and brand management that Paul had never faced when working within his immediate neighborhood. The establishment of a small nonprofit organization to coordinate expansion efforts required Paul to learn skills in administration, fundraising, and board governance that were completely different from his strengths in relationship building and community organizing, creating stress and frustration that threatened to undermine his effectiveness in the direct service work that he found most rewarding and meaningful. The success of the expansion phase demonstrated that Paul's community development model could work in diverse contexts with appropriate adaptation and genuine partnership with local leaders, but also revealed the challenges of scaling relationship-based approaches without compromising the authenticity and cultural sensitivity that made them effective in building trust and achieving practical results for families who had been failed by traditional institutional approaches. The next phase would require Paul to develop systems for sustaining and supporting a network of community development initiatives while maintaining his own effectiveness as a community organizer and preserving the authentic relationships and cultural values that had made his work successful in transforming lives and building stronger communities where ordinary people could discover and develop their extraordinary potential. Chapter 4, The Catalyst. Paul Hogan's community development work reached a critical turning point when the New South Wales government approached him to serve as a consultant on welfare reform initiatives, creating an opportunity to influence policy affecting hundreds of thousands of working-class families while also risking co-optation by institutional systems that might compromise the authentic, community-controlled approaches that had made his grassroots program successful. The government invitation came through Minister Helen Walsh, a pragmatic labor politician who had noticed the effectiveness of Paul's community-based programs and recognized that traditional welfare approaches were failing to address the complex challenges facing working-class families while consuming enormous resources without producing sustainable improvements in employment, housing, or family stability. Walsh's initial meeting with Paul revealed her genuine commitment to evidence-based policy reform and willingness to challenge bureaucratic assumptions, but also exposed the political constraints and institutional pressures that limited government flexibility in developing innovative approaches that might threaten existing professional and organizational interests within the social service establishment. The problem isn't lack of funding or good intentions, Walsh explained during their first formal meeting. The problem is that our systems were designed by middle-class professionals who've never lived paycheck to paycheck, and they're administered by bureaucrats who measure success by compliance with procedures rather than improvement in family outcomes. We need someone who understands both the community reality and the media landscape to help us bridge that gap. Paul's decision to engage with the government consultation process required careful consideration of both opportunities and risks, as his involvement could provide access to resources and policy influence that could benefit thousands of families while potentially compromising his credibility with community partners who viewed government institutions with justified skepticism based on decades of broken promises and ineffective programs. The consultation process began with Paul organizing community forums where working-class families could share their experiences with government programs and suggest improvements based on their practical knowledge of what worked and what didn't, creating unprecedented opportunities for direct dialogue between policymakers and the people most affected by their decisions. These community forums revealed consistent patterns of problems, including bureaucratic inflexibility, cultural insensitivity, perverse incentives that discourage self-improvement efforts, and lack of accountability for program outcomes, but also identified existing government resources and capabilities that could be redirected more effectively with appropriate modifications to procedures and priorities. The forums also demonstrated the sophisticated understanding that working-class families possessed regarding their own challenges and potential solutions, challenging stereotypes about passive dependence while revealing innovative approaches to problem-solving that could inform policy development if government officials were willing to listen and learn rather than simply implementing predetermined solutions. Paul's role in facilitating these forums required him to translate between different cultural and professional languages while maintaining authentic relationships with community participants and building credible connections with government officials who needed to understand that effective policy required genuine partnership rather than top-down implementation of expert solutions. The policy recommendations that emerged from this process emphasized community ownership, cultural responsiveness, and outcomes-based accountability while reducing bureaucratic barriers and increasing flexibility for local adaptation. Adaptation would require significant changes in government procedures and professional practices that threatened established interests and career advancement patterns. Minister Walsh's support for these recommendations was tested when department bureaucrats and professional associations raised concerns about accountability, quality control, and professional standards, requiring political courage and administrative skill to overcome resistance from established interests that benefited from existing systems regardless of their effectiveness for families. Paul's media connections proved valuable for building public support for policy reforms while maintaining pressure on government officials to follow through on commitments, but his involvement also attracted criticism from political opponents who characterized him as an unqualified celebrity interfering in serious policy matters that required professional expertise rather than community experience. The pilot implementation of community-controlled welfare programs in 3 Sydney neighborhoods provided evidence of superior outcomes compared to traditional approaches, including higher employment rates, improved family stability, reduced dependency, and greater participant satisfaction, while costs were lower and administrative efficiency was higher than conventional programs. These positive results generated interest from other state governments and federal agencies, creating opportunities for broader policy influence while also attracting attention from research institutions and international development organizations seeking to understand how Paul's approaches might be adapted to different contexts and challenges. The success of the government consultation work established Paul as a credible voice on social policy issues while maintaining his authentic relationships with working-class communities, but also created new demands on his time and energy that threatened to pull him away from direct community organizing work that remained his primary source of satisfaction and effectiveness. The documentation of policy outcomes and community responses provided evidence that authentic leadership and genuine community partnership could achieve results that exceeded those of traditional professional approaches while creating models for policy development that respected both community wisdom and institutional capabilities without sacrificing effectiveness or accountability. The Catalyst phase demonstrated that Paul's community development work could influence systems change at the policy level while maintaining grassroots authenticity and community ownership, but also revealed the ongoing challenges of scaling relationship-based approaches without losing the personal connection and cultural sensitivity that made them effective in transforming lives and building stronger communities. Chapter 5, The Legacy Builder. As Paul Hogan's community development work matured into a recognized model for authentic social change, he faced the challenge of ensuring sustainability and continued growth while preserving the relationship-based approach and community ownership principles that had made his initiatives successful in transforming lives and building stronger neighborhoods where ordinary people could discover and develop their extraordinary potential. The establishment of the Australian Community Development Institute provided a formal structure for training community organizers, documenting best practices, and supporting the growing network of neighborhoods implementing Paul's approaches while maintaining focus on local ownership and cultural adaptation rather than standardized program replication that might compromise authenticity and effectiveness. The Institute's first cohort of community organizer trainees included representatives from rural farming communities, urban Aboriginal neighborhoods, immigrant enclaves, and traditional working-class suburbs, each bringing unique perspectives and challenges while sharing common commitments to community empowerment and authentic relationship building that transcended differences in culture, geography, and economic circumstances. Sarah Mackenzie, a former teacher from the drought-affected farming community of Wagga Wagga, became one of Paul's most successful protégés after adapting his urban community development approaches to address rural challenges, including farm foreclosures, youth emigration, and economic diversification, while maintaining agricultural traditions and community identity that were essential for rural resilience and cultural continuity. Mackenzie's rural adaptation demonstrated that Paul's principles of community ownership, authentic relationship building, and practical problem-solving could be applied effectively in very different contexts while maintaining respect for local knowledge and cultural values that outside experts often ignored or misunderstood when developing solutions for rural communities. The success of rural applications led to invitations from international development organizations seeking to understand how Paul's approaches might inform community development work in developing countries, creating opportunities for global influence while raising questions about cultural appropriateness and the challenges of adapting relationship-based methods across significant cultural and economic differences. Paul's collaboration with Indigenous Australian communities deepened during this period as Aboriginal leaders invited him to support their efforts to develop culturally appropriate economic development programs that could address poverty and unemployment while preserving traditional cultural values and strengthening connection to country that were essential for Indigenous community health and identity. The Indigenous partnerships required Paul to continue learning about cultural humility and the importance of supporting indigenous leadership rather than attempting to lead initiatives in communities where his cultural knowledge and historical understanding were necessarily limited, while contributing resources and connections that could support indigenous-controlled development efforts. Working with Torres Strait Islander communities provided additional opportunities to understand how authentic community development required deep cultural knowledge and long-term relationship building that could not be rushed or superficially replicated, while also revealing how traditional indigenous approaches to community development offered valuable insights that could inform mainstream Australian community organizing efforts. The documentation of these diverse applications created a substantial body of knowledge about community development that attracted academic attention and research partnerships, leading to university collaborations that provided rigorous evaluation of outcomes while maintaining focus on practical applications that served community needs rather than academic career advancement or theoretical speculation. The research partnerships revealed that Paul's community-based approaches achieved consistently superior outcomes compared to traditional social service programs across multiple measures, including employment, education, health, family stability, and community cohesion, while costs were lower and participant satisfaction was dramatically higher than conventional institutional approaches. These research findings generated international attention and invitations for Paul to share his approaches with community development practitioners, government officials, and academic researchers in countries including Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and several Nordic nations with strong traditions of community-based social policy development. The international speaking and consulting work created additional revenue streams that could support expanded domestic programming while building Paul's profile as a thought leader on authentic community development, but also created time pressures and travel demands that threatened to disconnect him from the local relationship building that remained the foundation of his effectiveness and credibility. The development of online training resources and virtual networking systems allowed Paul to share knowledge and support practitioners without requiring extensive travel, while creating opportunities for peer learning and collaboration among community organizers working in different contexts but facing similar challenges in building authentic, community-controlled development programs. The establishment of an annual community development conference provided opportunities for practitioners to gather, share experiences, and develop collaborative initiatives while celebrating successes and addressing challenges that emerged as the network grew and matured, creating a community of practice that could support continued innovation and improvement in authentic community development approaches. Paul's television career during this period evolved to incorporate themes and stories related to community development while maintaining entertainment value and broad audience appeal, demonstrating how media platforms could be used to educate and inspire without sacrificing artistic integrity or commercial viability. The integration of community development themes into Paul's entertainment work created synergies that amplified both his media influence and his community organizing effectiveness, while providing financial resources that could support expanded programming and reduce dependence on government funding or charitable donations that might compromise program independence and community ownership. The legacy-building phase established systems and relationships that could sustain Paul's community development work beyond his individual involvement, while maintaining the authentic, relationship-based approaches that had made his initiative successful in transforming lives and building stronger communities where ordinary people could achieve their potential through mutual support and collective action. Chapter 6: The Ripple Effect. The long-term impact of Paul Hogan's community development work began to reveal itself through second- and third-generation effects as children who had grown up in communities transformed by his initiatives became community leaders themselves, carrying forward principles of authentic relationship building and mutual support while adapting them to new challenges and opportunities that emerged as Australian society evolved through the late 20th century. Jessica Sullivan, whose grandparents had been among Paul's first community development clients, completed her social work degree and returned to her neighborhood to establish programs serving refugee families and recent immigrants, demonstrating how community development principles could be transmitted across generations while adapting to changing demographic and social conditions that required fresh approaches to familiar challenges. The refugee resettlement programs that Jessica developed incorporated lessons learned from Paul's work with Aboriginal and immigrant communities, emphasizing cultural respect, community ownership, and practical problem-solving while addressing specific challenges faced by families fleeing conflict and seeking to rebuild their lives in an unfamiliar cultural and economic environment. These programs' success in helping refugee families achieve economic independence while maintaining cultural identity demonstrated the continued relevance of Paul's authentic community development approaches, while proving that relationship-based methods could be adapted to address emerging social challenges that government institutions often handled through bureaucratic procedures that ignored cultural differences and individual needs. The establishment of multicultural community centers in neighborhoods throughout Sydney created gathering spaces where different ethnic communities could maintain their cultural traditions while building relationships with neighbors from different backgrounds, fostering the kind of authentic cross-cultural understanding that Paul had always believed was essential for healthy community development. The success of these multicultural initiatives attracted attention from federal immigration officials seeking more effective approaches to refugee resettlement and immigrant integration, leading to policy consultations that allowed Paul to influence national policy while maintaining his focus on community-controlled programming that respected cultural diversity and promoted mutual understanding. Aboriginal community leaders who had worked with Paul during his early expansion efforts invited him to support the development of urban indigenous cultural centers that could provide space for traditional cultural practices while offering practical programs including job training, small business development, and educational support that addressed contemporary challenges without compromising traditional values and community relationships. The urban indigenous cultural centers became models for culturally appropriate community development that could bridge traditional and contemporary needs while building pride and connection among indigenous youth who had often been disconnected from their cultural heritage due to historical policies of forced assimilation and cultural destruction. The success of these indigenous initiatives contributed to broader recognition of the value of culturally responsive community development approaches, influencing government policies related to Indigenous affairs while demonstrating how authentic partnership between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians could create positive outcomes that benefited entire communities rather than just specific ethnic groups. Paul's work with environmental sustainability initiatives during this period demonstrated how community development principles could be applied to address ecological challenges while building economic opportunities and community resilience that serve both environmental and social objectives through integrated approaches that recognize the connections between environmental health and community well-being. The community garden networks that had begun as simple food production projects evolved into comprehensive sustainability education and demonstration sites that taught families how to reduce their environmental impact while saving money and building relationships with neighbors who shared concerns about environmental protection and community self-reliance. These environmental initiatives attracted support from conservation organizations and environmental justice advocates who recognized that community-based approaches could achieve environmental objectives more effectively than top-down regulatory approaches, while also addressing social equity concerns that were often ignored by mainstream environmental organizations focused primarily on conservation rather than community development. The integration of environmental themes into Paul's community development work created opportunities for collaboration with younger activists who brought fresh perspectives and energy while learning from his experience in relationship building and community organizing, demonstrating how intergenerational partnership could strengthen both environmental and social justice movements. The documentation of environmental outcomes from community-based sustainability initiatives provided evidence that grassroots approaches could achieve significant environmental improvements while building community capacity and economic opportunity, influencing environmental policy development while maintaining focus on community ownership and local control of environmental programming. International recognition of Paul's integrated approach to community development, cultural respect, and environmental sustainability led to invitations from the United Nations and other international organizations seeking to understand how his methods might inform global development efforts, particularly in contexts where traditional development approaches had failed to achieve sustainable improvements in community well-being. The international consultation work revealed common patterns in community development challenges across different countries and cultures, while also demonstrating the importance of local adaptation and cultural sensitivity in developing effective approaches that respected community knowledge and values while addressing practical needs and opportunities. The establishment of international networks of community development practitioners created opportunities for sharing knowledge and resources across national boundaries while maintaining focus on local ownership and cultural appropriateness that prevented the kind of cultural imperialism that often characterized international development efforts led by wealthy countries and institutions. The ripple effects of Paul's work continued expanding through multiple generations and geographic regions while maintaining the core principles of authentic relationship building, community ownership, and practical problem solving that had made his initial neighborhood initiatives successful in transforming lives and building stronger communities where ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things through mutual support and collective action. Epilogue: The Enduring Foundation. 25 years after Paul Hogan first decided to transform his television success into community service, his legacy continues expanding through thousands of practitioners who carry forward his principles of authentic relationship building and community empowerment while adapting them to contemporary challenges that require fresh approaches grounded in timeless values of mutual respect, practical problem solving, and genuine care for human dignity and potential. The Australian Community Development Institute has become an internationally recognized center for training community organizers and documenting best practices in authentic relationship-based community development, attracting students and researchers from around the world while maintaining its foundation commitment to serving working-class communities and supporting grassroots leadership development rather than academic theorizing or professional careerism. Dr. Maria Santos, now the Institute's director, continues developing programs that integrate Paul's original insights about authentic leadership with contemporary understanding of cultural diversity, environmental sustainability, and technological innovation, demonstrating how foundational principles can evolve and adapt while maintaining their essential character and effectiveness in building stronger communities. The network of communities implementing Paul's approaches has grown to include over 200 neighborhoods across Australia and similar initiatives in 15 countries, each adapting core principles to local conditions while sharing knowledge and resources through annual conferences, online platforms, and collaborative projects that build international solidarity while respecting cultural differences and local priorities. Aboriginal community leaders continue working in partnership with the Institute to develop culturally appropriate community development approaches that honor traditional Indigenous wisdom while addressing contemporary challenges, creating models for authentic cross-cultural collaboration that could inform reconciliation efforts and policy development related to Indigenous rights and community development. The refugee resettlement programs pioneered by Jessica Sullivan have been adopted by government agencies and nonprofit organizations throughout Australia, demonstrating how community-based approaches can achieve superior outcomes while reducing costs and improving satisfaction among both refugees and receiving communities who benefit from increased cultural diversity and mutual understanding. Environmental sustainability initiatives that grew from Paul's community garden networks have evolved into comprehensive programs addressing climate change adaptation, renewable energy development, and sustainable agriculture, proving that community-based approaches can address global challenges while building local resilience and economic opportunity for working-class families. The policy influence generated by Paul's work continues affecting government programs at local, state, and federal levels, with community-controlled approaches increasingly recognized as more effective and efficient than traditional bureaucratic programs, leading to systematic reforms that prioritize community ownership and outcomes-based accountability rather than professional control and procedural compliance. Paul's entertainment career evolved to incorporate themes of community empowerment and social justice while maintaining broad appeal and commercial success, demonstrating how authentic values and genuine community connection can enhance rather than compromise artistic integrity and popular entertainment that serves both commercial and social objectives. The thing I'm most proud of isn't the television shows or movies or any individual recognition, Paul reflected during a recent interview celebrating the Institute's 25th anniversary. It's knowing that thousands of families have better lives because we proved that ordinary people can solve extraordinary problems when they work together with authentic relationships and mutual respect. That's the kind of success that lasts beyond any individual career or achievement. The research documentation of outcomes from Paul's community development work provides compelling evidence that relationship-based approaches achieve superior results compared to traditional institutional programs across multiple measures, including employment, education, health, family stability, and community cohesion, while costs are lower and participant satisfaction is dramatically higher. Current challenges facing working-class communities, including housing affordability, job insecurity, and social fragmentation, continue requiring innovative approaches that build on Paul's foundational insights while adapting to contemporary conditions that previous generations of community organizers could not have anticipated, but that respond to the same principles of authentic leadership and genuine care. The young community organizers trained through Institute programs bring energy, technological sophistication, and diverse cultural perspectives while learning from Paul's experience in relationship building and practical problem solving, creating intergenerational partnerships that strengthen both innovation and wisdom in contemporary community development efforts. International development organizations increasingly recognize the value of Paul's approaches for addressing poverty and social challenges in developing countries, leading to collaborative projects that share knowledge and resources while maintaining respect for local culture and community ownership that prevents the cultural imperialism that has characterized many international development efforts. The continuing expansion of Paul's influence through practitioners who adapt his principles to new contexts and challenges demonstrates that authentic leadership creates lasting positive change rather than temporary celebrity, proving that genuine service to others generates influence that extends far beyond individual achievement or recognition. Paul's story continues inspiring individuals who seek to transform their personal success into community service while maintaining authentic relationships and cultural values, that honor both individual achievement and collective responsibility for creating communities where all people can discover and develop their extraordinary potential through mutual support and authentic connection. The bridge builder, who began with steel and concrete, ultimately constructed connections between people, communities, and cultures that continue strengthening with each generation, proving that authentic leadership based on genuine service creates permanent positive change that extends far beyond any individual lifetime or career achievement. The enduring foundation that Paul established through decades of authentic community development work continues supporting new generations of leaders who carry forward his principles while adapting them to contemporary challenges, ensuring that his legacy of service, respect, and practical problem-solving will continue transforming lives and building stronger communities for generations to come.